All right, hey everyone. I think we can get started. How are you all doing? Yeah, okay. So I have oh, can you all hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, okay, good. Thanks. All right. So feel free to throw up questions into the chat if you want. I think just to get the ball rolling, I'm going to look at the few questions that we have from the survey. And then once we get through those, I'll look through like the questions that you guys throw up on Slack. All right. So let's see here. So this is, oh, let me share my screen. All right. So these are the questions that were in the form that you should be seeing hopefully now. So I'm going to go through them not in order because there's going to be some easy ones and some less easy ones. First one is, what type of multiple choice questions will there be? So essentially the multiple choice, just to remind everyone, the exam will be 70% multiple choice, 30% like actual coding questions. The multiple choice questions will be, multiple choice. They'll be very, very similar to the format that you've seen in the quizzes. So basically, if you've done well in the quizzes, if you've done all the quizzes, you should be fine for the multiple choice section out there. There'll be like different questions, but like pretty like similar, same style of questions, same kind of things that they're asking, just asking slightly different things. And obviously, like as I'm going through, like feel free to ask questions about anything I'm talking about as I'm going along, right? The coding questions, there'll be 3 different coding questions. And again, those coding questions will also be similar to things you've done before, either in the discussions or in the homeworks. They won't be, they'll be less complex than like something like PIG, which is the last one that you did. because that that would be like a big thing to ask you guys to do in an exam. So they'll be smaller in scale than that, but they'll be the same kinds of questions. So all stuff that you've done before, just in a different context, different type of question. All right. Any questions about actually any other questions about just the exam, the format, stuff like that? No. All right. So that is. Oh, what do you mean in coding questions specifically? Oh yeah, okay, that's a good question. So the coding questions, the way they're set up is, I mean, the whole exam is a D2L quiz, right? So it's the same format that you're used to. The coding questions are basically long answer text questions. So basically, you'll have like a big kind of like text box to kind of fill in and put your code in. The thing to keep in mind, which is actually very, very important, is essentially your code has to run. If your code doesn't run, you lose a lot of points right off the bat. What we're going to do is we're going to copy paste your code from the D2L answer box into VS Code, run it, and then see if it works or not. And then if we'll have like a series of like test cases. Does it do this? Does it do that? All the things that we expect it to do. So in order to get full points, you need to have your code that can be easily copy pasted from the D2L box to VS Code and run and do everything that it's supposed to do. All right. And so what that means is that everything, the tabs, everything that you need when you're normally coding, they need to all be there. What I highly recommend for the exam, you can and should use VS Code. What I would recommend is that you write your code in VS Code, make sure, do all your testing, do everything that you normally do for your assignments, for your discussions, whatever. Make sure your code actually works. And then once you're 100% sure, then copy paste that code into the D2L question box. And then that way you're pretty sure that it'll be okay, right? If you want to be triple sure that there hasn't been anything lost in the mix, what you could do is then copy it back into. So that's the thing. So it shouldn't mess with the format. But sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, they celebrate my birthday.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, so it shouldn't. I mean, so when I do it, it usually doesn't. There are some cases where it might if you accidentally like do a couple things. So what I would do if you want to be 100% sure is copy paste from VS Code into the text box, then copy once again from the text box back into VS Code and then run it. If that works, then you're good. Also keep in mind that we are not unreasonable. There's no auto grader here. We're, me and the SLs are going to be the ones grading this. So if there's like one small like indent that's wrong, or there's like obviously like if there's something that's really obviously just an error from copy pasting, then we won't dock points for that. But just make sure as much as possible, like if you want to 100% make our lives easier and make sure that your grade gets all the points that it should, just make sure that if you copy paste it from D2L to VS Code that it runs right. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right, cool. Yeah, that's a good question. I always forget to mention that, but that's yeah, definitely by all means, make sure your code runs. That is like the very, very first thing. If your code doesn't run, if it throws errors right off the bat, that's a lot of points lost. So at the very least, just make sure your code actually runs without errors, and then try to test it as much as possible. If the code is supposed to return 8 in a certain condition, make sure it actually returns 8, right? And at this point in the semester, you should be able to kind of like do all those things. So you should be able to like test your own code and make sure that it does everything that you need it to. The other thing I want to mention is the exam is, oh shoot, I forget now. I think it's 2.5 hours long, which is way more than you need. I think initially, the exam is meant to be 1 hour long. Like that's how long it should take. And I've just bumped it up to 2.5 because I don't actually care how quickly you do things. I care what you know, right? So and there's like there's an upper there's a ceiling to, it can give you an infinite amount of time and you only know what you know, right? And I want to know what you know, and I don't want to know how quickly you can code or do whatever. That's not what we're testing here. So so you'll have 2.5 hours to do the exam. That should be more than enough. Like that should be way more than you'll ever need. So just know that you will not be rushed when you're working on the coding questions. I mean, obviously, manage your time effectively, be smart about it, but really you should have way more time than you need. Other questions about the exam or anything like that while we're on the topic? No? All right. So like I said, if you have questions, you can throw them up on the chat, and in the meantime, I'll or I mean, you can also just like speak up, also obviously. And in the meantime, I'll go through this list of questions I got from the forum. So this is another pretty easy one. Will there be any questions on how the test programs work? Should we be prepared to demonstrate knowledge of what the test code does at a basic level? No. Those test functions are really just to make grading manageable. And also for you guys, like as a guide for you guys when you're actually working on your homework. But that is beyond like the scope of this class. Like, you guys need to know how to use them, but that's not what we're trying to teach you guys. So that's not going to be on the exam. So we can knock that one out. Let's see here. What are the easy ones to knock out? So yeah, so this I will do. I assume there'll be other questions as we go on, where this will come up, and if not, then I'll pick a random example. But we can do an execution trace later. Yeah, all right. So someone asked about question 10 from week 8's quiz, which is over here, and this is basically the question, right? So it's basically saying, given if you run this code, what will the value of mystery be, right? It's saying if your answer is a string, surround it with single quotes. If it's a number, just write the number. If it's a Boolean, write either true or false with no quotes. If the code won't work, or crashes or infinite loop or whatever, write error with no quotes, right? So, and again, for as I'm sure I hope you know at this point, the way D2L reads your answers, it matters how you format it. So if it's a string, it needs to be in single quotes, so on and so forth. So just make sure you pay attention to that. So in this case, let's see. Yeah, okay. So I mean, so there's a couple of things, right? So one is probably the easiest way to do this is to actually just take this and throw it into the Python terminal, Python shell. That's the one. So this is basically that code. Press enter, all that code is there, and then I can basically just check what is actually in mystery. And I can see here it's telling me, what is this actually? Can you guys tell me what that is? What's actually currently in mystery?
It's an empty string.
Yeah, it's an empty string, right? And so the way that you would answer that when you're submitting that to D2L the quiz, you just do two quotes like this, two single quotes and with nothing in the middle, and that's an empty string, and that should be the answer, right?
Do you have to put a space in there, like between the two single quotes?
No, because a space is a character, right?
Okay.
So the answer could have been mystery could have contained a space, a character for space, but it doesn't. It's actually an empty string, right? And
So
I know that
incorrect if you put the space in there.
yeah, because this is not equal to this, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So those two things are not the same thing. An empty string is different from a string containing a space.
Got it.
And it makes sense in the sense where just how this information is being stored by the computer. This is actually being stored like as an ASCII. I don't know what the value is off the top of my head, but it's being stored. There's a value to a space, right? It's not nothing. It's actually space. Well, as this is actually literally there's nothing in the string. It's a string, but there's no character in it. Yeah, I mean, so by far that's the easiest way to solve that. But if we actually solve it manually, like why does that actually? So that might be a good example of an execution trace while we're at it. So the way that I would do that, All right, well, my disk is apparently too messy for me to find my thing. So that's all right. We'll just do it. You have to excuse my terrible writing. Okay. So execution trace is just another way of saying that we want to be able to, or we want to like think through what's going on in our loop, right? So here, if we want to see why we end up with an empty string, we can do an execution trace and predict what should happen when we run this loop, right? So, so the way you do this is, so essentially this, like over here, you'd have the iterations. So the how manyth time you've gone through that loop, right? And then across here, you'd have all the different variables. Here, iteration 0 means before the loop even starts, which would be kind of up here, what are the values of the different variables? And then through the first iteration, what are the values of or at the end of the first iteration, what are the values of the variables? What are the values at the end of second, third, fourth, so on and so forth, right? So like I said, we're going to have the different names of the variables up here. So there's going to be string, like I said, pardon my terrible writing. I'm not going to write out mystery entirely, so mystery would be over here. And then we have I, that's another variable. And that's it, right? So we have 3 different variables. Let's do this just so it's a little bit more visible. So we have 3 different variables. Erase that. All right, so yeah, 3 different variables. And then basically what we're trying to do is track through and think through what value each of these variables is going to have at each iteration of the loop, right? So yeah, actually this might be better. So at before the loop even starts, what value does string 1 have? Not 0.
I.
Not I. The variable string 1. Before the loops, so yeah, all right, let me clarify what I mean. What I mean is right before the loop starts, what value does it have? Yeah, it's going to be I am 4 dogs, which is what type of object?
String.
Right, it's a string, right? Does this work? Yay, all right, that'll be better than my terrible handwriting. Okay, so string 1 will be I am 4 dogs. What value does mystery have? Right, so it's going to be an empty string, right? So if we do that, and so what type of object is that? It's a string, because we just literally said it's an empty string. And what value does I have? Yeah, not 0. Not length of string.
It's 11. 1 minus the string, the length of the string.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'm just gonna recount because I didn't count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Oh wait, so
There's next exclamation point you forgot at the end of that.
Thank you. Let's do that. Let's get rid of this one. Let's hide that one over there. So yeah, so it should be, so I will have the value of, we said 11. And what type of object will that be?
It's a string, isn't it?
It'll be an int, because length returns an int, and you couldn't do -1 to a string, right?
Okay.
It would throw an error. So so that'll be an int, which is again here why I don't have it in quotes, right? All right, so before our loop even starts, we have 3 different variables and we know what their value is, right? Okay, so now, and again, all we're really doing is we're pretending that we're Python and we're reading the code the way Python would, right? So if I'm Python, what I would do then is I would come over here I'm like, okay, I'm starting a while loop, and there's a condition here. Is this true or false?
False.
Let me think that through. I mean,
Well,
so
I
I
is
mean,
equal to 11.
yeah. So exactly, yeah. So sorry, I just need to like double. Whenever an answer seems really easy, it's always good to like double check. Check yourself. So, I mean, and even then, like what I would do just to double check is I would come over here, being like, all right, so this has a value of 0. What is the value of I? I is 11. So is 11 less or equal to 0?
No.
No, so it'd be false.
Right. So yeah, and I realize now that looks that looks like something else. All right. So okay. So this is going to return false. So what's Python going to do? Is it going to come down here and read this?
No, it ends.
No, that's it, right? This condition, this is false, and so Python's like, all right, nothing to do here, and so it's kind of a bad execution trace because essentially there is no first iteration of the loop, right? Which then is exactly why mystery is still equal to just an empty string, because it never actually went to the loop where anything happens to it, right? So like at the end of like my while loop, these are still the values of my variables, right? Does that make sense, everyone?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so let's because that's not the most exciting what do you call it, execution trace. What we'll do is let's do this. I think I posted something in the announcements about how to do it. Like if you go to quizzes and then you hit the little chevron and then you can look at your attempts, I think is the way to do it. All right, so if we change this instead so that the condition might be true at some point, so let's kind of go through the same exercise. So, I mean, this we already know that before the loop starts, these are still going to be the values of our variables. So is this going to be true or false? Yeah, it should be true, right? Because I is equal to 11, or I evaluates to 11, and 11 is bigger or equal to 0, so that's going to be true. So if I'm Python and I'm reading this, I'm going to actually go ahead and do the stuff inside the loop. So is I divided by 3 equal to 0? No.
No,
So this is not going to happen. And then what's going to happen to I?
it's gonna be subtracted by 1 if I can see it correctly.
Yeah, that's right.
So
So at the end of the loop, the first iteration of the loop, what value will string 1 have?
10, because
String
it's
1.
currently 11, right?
String 1.
Oh. Let's see.
Let's see if I can rewrite this. So string 1 will still have the value I am 4 dogs, right? Because there's nothing anywhere in here that changes the value of string 1, right? So that'll be the same at the first iteration of the loop. And actually that's going to be confusing, so let's not do that. Let's instead do, let's just do like a little arrow downwards to say that this value continues down here, right?
Sorry,
value...
maybe I'm not understanding, but if I am 4 dogs, like if I is going to be that string -1, would it be equal to the amount of characters in that string, or would it just be equal to what the string is?
So string 1, we said before the loop even starts, string 1 has, actually it should be Sorry, let me fix my mistake. Oops. So that should be one thing over here. So let's take that. Let's get rid of this one. Okay. So, oh, and there's a quote missing. Well, all right, never mind. Okay, so we're saying before the loop starts, string one, the variable called string one, right, which is over here, has the value of I am 4 dogs, which is a string, right? So anywhere in here is the value of string one ever changed?
No.
Right. So what will be the value of string one at the end of the first iteration of the loop?
Stay the same.
Yeah, it'll be I am 4 dogs, a string, right? That'll make me a little crazy. All right. So what will the value of mystery be at the end of the first iteration of the loop?
Empty string.
Yeah, it'll still be an empty string because nothing has changed. And what will the value of I be at the end of the first iteration?
10.
10, right? Because we subtracted, the only thing that changed is the value of I over here at the iteration of the first loop. All right. So now we know that at the end of this loop, at the end of this iteration, string one has the value of I am 4 dogs, mystery has the value of an empty string, I has the value of the int 10, right? Okay, so we're starting again. We're basically doing the same thing over again. That's super annoying. All right, so we're going through the same process again. So we're starting our loop again. We're checking, is I greater or equal to 0?
Yes.
It still is. It's equal. It has a value of 10. 10 is bigger than 0, so that's going to be true. So it's going to come down here. Is I divided by 3 equal to 0?
No.
So it's not going to do that, and then it's going to do this. And so at the end of our second iteration, what will the value of string one be?
Same.
Same. Mystery?
Same.
And I?
9.
9. All right. So I mean, so I won't go through. Actually, I won't, but you should. You should always do every single step, because the thing is, part of the reason we're doing this is our brains are really, really bad at like thinking through things properly. And this is why we need to actually like write out every little thing, even though it seems tedious. And actually, yeah, let's actually just do it, because I think it'll be pretty quick to do anyway. All right, so third iteration. What's the value of string one going to be at the end of it?
Same.
Mystery?
Same.
And I?
8.
All right, so at what point will any of that be different?
Only if the section below the while loop equates to true.
Which will happen when?
I equals 0.
What's 9 divided by 3?
3.
So is that equal to 0?
No. So it will basically never happen then.
Is that correct? Does everyone agree with that?
When I equals 0.
Oh,
0
yeah.
divided by 3.
Sorry. Yes, you're right. That is my brain being dumb. Percent is remainder, not not divided. Yeah. This is, yeah. So yes, you're right. 9 remainder 3 will be 0, right? So actually, let's step back a little bit. I am totally wrong about this. This is not correct. And this is not correct either. Okay, so at the end of this loop, no, all right. This is why we write everything down, so we don't get confused. This is at the end of the second iteration. String one has the value of I am 4 dogs. Mystery has the value of an empty string. I has the value of 9, right?
Mhm.
So third iteration, we're coming back up here, and we're saying, is the remainder I percent 3 equal to 0? Will that be true?
Yes.
Right, I at this point has the value of,
Yes.
yeah,
Oh,
Ishad? 9, right?
Right.
Like we just said, the I has this value at this point, so 9 divided by 3, the remainder is going to be 0, and so this is going to actually finally happen one time. So, and then I will get will I get also reduced by 1 also?
No. Because doesn't that only happen if that equates to false? Or
Where
am I
is
incorrect about that? So like
how is the I indented?
it's within the loop.
It's within the loop. Is it within the if?
Yes,
Are you sure?
I think. I'm not 100% sure.
It's not, right? So if the thing is, so only the things that are indented within the if are within the if. This is indented within the while. So those two rows will get
So that will always happen, basically.
yeah, the if and the I minus 1 will always happen as long as the loop is running. The thing that's inside the if, which is this line over here, that will only happen when this is true. Yeah, does that make sense?
I'm still allowing it to soak in.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, so again, if I'm Python, if I'm literally, this is what we're doing. We're trying to pretend we're Python and we're reading this, right? So I'm Python. I'm over here reading this line. Is I greater or equal to 0? So I at this point has the value of 9. So I'm like, okay, this evaluates to true. So this is the equivalent of saying, well, true. So good. I read the next line.
The next line equates to true then.
Let's one
Oh,
step
so
at
it
a time.
keeps it keeps on going.
So the next line, if I'm Python, this first thing was true, so then I'm going to go read what's indented within this while loop. So then I read this line, I say if this, so does this evaluate to true? It does. So then I'm like, okay, well, this evaluates to true, so it's the equivalent of saying if true, which then it does, it'll do this line over here. If this evaluates to false, then it won't do this line, right? But then, regardless of whether this is true or false, the next line within the while loop that I need to read is this one, right? And so in any case, if I'm going through the loop, I'm going to run this line, and then if this happens to be true, then I'll also run this line. Does that kind of make sense?
So the only one that has the potential to change is the mystery plus equals string.
Yes, the only thing that may or may not happen at each iteration of the loop is
what's underneath that if statement.
Yeah. The other lines will run because, I mean, the thing is, you can see it, right? They're all like lined up on the same imaginary line over here. So all of these things will run unless there's a break or a return, right? But basically, like, these things should always be, because these are indented within while and this is indented within the if, right? Okay, so at the end of our third iteration, what value will string 1 have?
It
Yeah,
will be
so
the same.
it'll still be the same. Basically, like, there's nothing in here that ever changes the value of string 1. So basically, we can assume that's the case. At the end of the third iteration, what value will mystery have?
Still an empty string, right?
Well, at this point, the if statement was true. So this will happen. And this changes the value of mystery, right?
Okay.
So
and remind me what plus equals does again.
It's basically like it's the equivalent of saying not quite. It's the equivalent of saying equals of saying this, right? Plus equals like saying plus this thing and the thing that I am already, right? It's like the thing plus another thing.
Okay, and would that be a specific character in string 1?
So I mean, so all right. So let's actually break it down, right? Actually here. So these two things are equivalent, right?
Uh-huh.
All right, so and essentially, so you know what you want to do is you want to be able to like break down your code into manageable blocks of things that you know what each bit evaluates to, right? So sort of like solving a math problem, you want to like break down a big math problem to like smaller math problem. Here, what you want to do is rewrite this in a different way, which is, I mean, that's the first thing I did is just rewrite it in a less complicated way. If I could spell, that would be better. That's better. So at that point, what does mystery evaluate to? At that point in our code. Right, at that point, it's still an empty string. So that's the same thing as saying that. And what does string one index I evaluate to? Or better yet, what does I evaluate to at that point? So first question, what does I evaluate to?
Nine.
Right. So this is the same thing as saying
Would be string and then the 9th character in
Yeah.
that string one.
So that's the same thing as saying this, right? These two, at this point in the code, at this point in our iterations, those well, the two lines I've written are saying the same thing, right? And so another way of writing that, so what does string 1 9 evaluate to, or string 1 index 9 evaluate to?
Oh.
0 1 2.
G.
So wait, let me count this again. 1 2
You have to count the spaces too, right?
So index 0 would be I, space 1, A2, M3, space 4, 4 5, space 6, D7, O 8, G 9, right?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the 9th index of string 1 should be G, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another way of saying this. And so if we do that, so then what will, if we're solving the other side of that equation, what does mystery then evaluate to after this concatenation?
G.
Yeah. So that's basically saying, I mean, you're basically saying like mystery equals G, right? Which, I mean, essentially at this point in the code, when you're running it, this is what Python is reading, or basically you're saying mystery is going to have the value of G, right? And
so does it just ignore the empty string part then?
Well, but no, it's concatenating. It's what it's doing, in fact, is it's taking an empty string and then adding it to it the string G, right?
Mhm.
But since an empty string, there's no character there. It's essentially you're basically putting like empty and then putting a G next to it. And then that's it, right? So if mystery, actually, yeah, let's keep going. Actually, so when we get to the next time it adds something, we'll see kind of what happens at that point. But yeah, so essentially like this sort of way of breaking down what each little chunk of the code evaluates to is a good way to like kind of figure out if you're confused about like what's actually going on. Just follow those very simple rules of like what does this little bit evaluate to, what does this other thing evaluate to, so on and so forth. And you're basically simplifying a complicated problem, right? Okay, so we said that mystery then would evaluate to what? G, right? And then
G.
yeah, and then I would evaluate to what at the end of that loop, that iteration?
8.
8, right? Okay, so so then we're going back to the beginning of our loop. Is I bigger or equal than 0?
Yes.
Still
No.
is. I has a value of 8. 8 is bigger than 0, right? Is I divided by 3 is the remainder equal to 0?
No.
No. And so at the end of this iteration of the loop, what will mystery be evaluate to?
G.
G. And what about I?
7.
7. All right, next iteration, what will mystery evaluate to?
Same. G.
And I?
6.
Correct. Next iteration, what's going to happen?
G plus index 6.
Right. So if we're just to do the long form of that, what we're essentially saying is, so this is going to be true. I is still bigger than 0, and 6 divided by 3, the remainder is going to be 0. So we're going to run this line again, right? So if we run that line again, what we're essentially saying is mystery equals mystery plus string 1 I. So we're starting from the same starting point as before. Oops. Yeah, pardon my terrible, but essentially we're saying the same thing, right? I'll just erase that, that'll be easier. All right, so we're starting from over here. And then if we're, again, doing our simplifying thing, we're saying mystery is going to be equal to, so what value does mystery have at that point in our code?
G.
Yeah, so it'll be G. And what, yeah, actually, let's do this. So if we're simplifying, that's what it should look like, right? Mystery equals G plus string 1I. So what will string 1I evaluate to?
Blank. It's a space.
Let me double check that. So it'll be index 6 of string 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so it'll be the space between the 4 and the dogs, right? So in this case, mystery equals G plus space. And so what does mystery evaluate to?
G
G
space.
space.
Correct. Right. It'll be, yeah, like that, which is different from just G before because there's an extra space there, right? Does that make sense? Yeah, and then what value will I have?
5.
5.
5. All right. Do we want to go all the way through, or is that pretty good, pretty solid?
Good.
Yeah, I mean, or is there anyone that wants me to go all the way through? All right, good enough. All right, so yeah, so yeah. All right, so I mean, at this point, like it's gonna basically just gonna add on the third index at some point, right? Which will be 0, 1, 2, 3, which will be M. So it'll end up with G space M in that case, right? And maybe index 0, maybe the I. All right, so yeah, so essentially, so 1, that is how you would do an execution trace. So and 2, this is sort of the usefulness of it. Like if you're not sure what a loop is going to do, this is a really good way to kind of write out bit by bit exactly what it's going to do. It's also a really good way to kind of make sure that your loop is doing what you think it is. Often we write code and we write a whole bunch of things, and then we think it's doing one thing, but it might be doing something else. If you just break it down to like small manageable pieces, it's a really good way to kind of get a sense of like what your code is actually doing, like actually reading through, pretending you're Python and reading one line at a time, doing exactly what it would be doing and writing what how the values of your different strings, what the value of each of your variables is. That's helpful. I don't think there's a question about. I don't think there's a question specifically about execution trace. But there will be questions that are similar to this in the sense where you'll have to basically do an execution trace, or at least like understand what the code is doing and predict what it's going to do in whatever context, right? Yeah, so I don't think there's anything specifically asking you to do an execution trace, but I think there's stuff that you might want to do an execution trace just to answer the question. All right. Oh, let's just do this. There we go. All right, so that's another question sorted. Oh, that's 2 for 1. All right. Yeah, okay. So some of these are a little bit tricky. So so this one I think we can handle. So the question is, can we go over when we should know that a while statement? Oh, I think basically they're asking like when you should be using while true versus just while a different condition, right? That's not a trivial question, but generally, the idea is you would use while true when you don't have an idea. There's not a you would use while true if you want your loop to keep going and going and going for a number of iterations that you don't really know how many that'll be, right? And so, for example, if you want a loop to keep going forever until the user inputs like a queue to quit, that's when you use while true, because there's no condition. Well, that's not true. You could probably set up in a way that like your condition actually looks for the queue. Yeah, actually, let me think. Is there a situation where you could only use while true? Yeah, Logan, you're in here, right? Can you think of a situation where you?
Oh, you don't want to hear my answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. I think it depends on. So yeah, I think off the top of my head, I don't think there's a situation where you would have to use while true. I think you could always get away with it by using while a condition, and you could still make the same loops that do the same thing. But yeah, I think while true is a simple, convenient way to do it. When you have like really clear exit conditions and you want to put the exit conditions inside of your loop. Actually, yeah. So there's one situation I can imagine if you want your loop to end. Yeah, but even then, yeah, you would just use break. And yeah, no, there's no. I can't imagine a situation where that wouldn't be the case. I think you can always use wherever you would use while true, you could use a condition, and that would be fine. What isn't true is there are situations where while true wouldn't work, where you have a very clear. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, if the condition's only defined, but even still, that's true. Yeah, well, but yeah, you could just initialize it like an empty variable before the loop starts or something. But yeah, so short version is, there are it's very rare that there might be a situation where you would have to use one or the other. I think in any case you could do one, or you could use either interchangeably. It's just how you set up your loop is going to be different. So essentially, if you do while condition, the exit conditions are like at the top of your loop, or like at the beginning of your loop. But if you have while true, then the exit conditions will be like inside of your loop necessarily. You'll have to like a if something then break kind of thing inside your loop.
So can you use the last question we just went through and put it as a while true loop instead of the while with a condition?
Yeah, let's
To
try
show us the
that.
differences between the two?
Yeah, let's see if what I'm saying is actually true or not. Should be, hopefully. Let's do that over here. All right, so this is our starting point. If we're doing this, yeah. So this is if we flip the sign here, this mystery will have the value of G space mi. All right, so essentially what we're going to do is going to remake this with a while true. So yeah, I mean, actually the easiest, laziest way of doing this is, I think, if we basically do this and then we do while true, and then I think the easiest way to do this, if I'm a lazy person, which I most certainly am, is if I think that would basically do it. Oh, no, that is not true. But that doesn't seem to pan out. I'm not sure why. So let's try this. Oh. So yeah, so this is where your brain is like not super clever. Yeah, exactly. So it should be in, it breaks the loop when it's bigger than. So what you want to do is do the inverse of that, is if it's smaller than 0, right? So in this case, so yeah, so it'll break the loop if the value is less than 0, which is the same thing that it's doing over here, right? So I think in this case, yeah, that should work. So essentially, yeah, you can basically put the break conditions inside of the loop instead of, and have it as a while true, and you end up with the same result essentially, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
Yeah, but yeah, good question. Yeah, all right. Let's. Let's see here. So this question, I'm not 100% sure what they're asking. So the question is, what kind of information do I need to put inside main functions for them to call the function properly? I'm not sure what they're asking, but the way I read this is, how do you get function calls to work properly? And I think the short version to that, the short answer to that is, let's use the same example, because I think that'll be interesting. So let's do a function definition. And we'll have it have one parameter. And then basically what we're going to do is we're going to take all of this. Actually, no, let's do this. I think that'll be less confusing. So essentially we're going to have the user input whatever the string, like instead of I am 4 dogs, we're going to have the user input whatever, or be the parameter, the argument that we pass to it being whatever the string is going to be, right? So then all the rest should be the same. So mystery will still be that. That will still break there. That'll still do that. That is fine. All right. So this is our function definition, which basically does the same thing we're doing before, except here we're asking an argument that is going to be the string that we pass to it, right? And so in order for for the function call for this new function that we've defined to be working inside the main, you have to, call the function, which is what we're doing here, and you need to pass to it an argument, which actually here, let's do. So let's just do I am. Just an example with this. So right. So if we do this, what value will test have? Let's see who's paying attention. Oh, that is a really good point. So yeah, thank you for fixing my mistake. Good call. All right. So yeah, and actually I should have clued into this because this was like the different pale color telling me that I'm not actually using my parameter anywhere inside of my function. And as soon as I do, it changes to like that paler color, which is telling me, yeah, no, good one, Jessica, seriously. All right, so assuming that I fix my mistake and I have this now, what value will test have? I can do this if that's helpful. GM. Does everyone agree with that? GA. Everyone agree with that? Anyone not agree with that? Better question. So test has no value. Can anyone tell me why that is? Yeah, exactly. No return. All right. So assuming that I fixed that, now if you do this, it should have the same. It should return the same value as this, which was.
If something doesn't have a return, is it always empty like that?
It'll be none. The default return is none. So if I have no return, is the same thing as saying this.
Okay.
Which is why when I did type test down here, it said it was none type because it was none. Because by default, that's what this evaluates to. If you have no return, this bit of code evaluates to has the value of none, and so it took none and put it into the variable test. All right, and so if we do that, and we do this, oh yeah, sorry. Let's switch mystery back. Run that. Run that, and so test will then have the value of G space M capital I, right? Okay, and so short answer is in order to have a function call work inside your main, it needs to be indented within the main, right? All of these things are all indented within defining the main function. And then you need to have the function call, you need to have whatever arguments are there, and that's it, right? You don't even need like this. You can just run the function call. It just whatever value is returned just won't be stored anywhere, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Any questions about any of that?
Oh yeah, I had a question. Oh, how do you know what you're supposed to return? Like what variable, or if it's true or false, or
I mean, so for the most part, pretty much in this class, we will literally explicitly tell you what you need to return. Like in the question, in the homework, in the whatever, it'll say return this. If it doesn't say return, you don't have to return anything, right? Let me, yeah, because I'm gonna access the D2L site for a second, and I don't want to like show something that I'm not supposed to, but like if we, for example, read. Yeah, I think this is probably a good example. All right. All right, so this is, I think, one of the last discussion questions that you guys had. I mean, and that's the thing, like in every single one of the questions, and when we give you the specs, we literally tell you exactly how the functions are built, right? We're telling you write a function called, and actually, so this is kind of a thing, like if whenever I'm answering kind of the questions like you guys are, like the way that I usually do this is as I'm running this, I'll go fill in the bits and pieces in VS Code as I'm doing it, right? So it's saying write a function called price of rocks. So already there, I'm translating this to, I need to define a function and it has to be called price of rocks, right? So I can take price of rocks, and I said, we're writing a function, so we're defining price of rocks. So at the very least, there's going to be this, right? It has no parameters, which then tells me I can just do this. If there were parameters, I would put the parameters in right then and there, because again, we're spelling out exactly what the inputs and the outputs are. We're literally telling you, right? And then it's telling you in a while loop, get a rock type, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, it says return the total price of all the material, right? So we're literally telling you, you need to return something. Dumb keyboard. We're telling you, you have to return something. And then what I usually like to do is I'll create a variable at that point that means what I'm supposed to return, right? So total price of material. Right, so already there, I'm creating a variable that is going to be containing whatever my thing that I need to return is, right? And so then all I need to do is fill in like in the middle of like all the stuff that it's supposed to do, and then at the end I should have a variable that is called this that contains that value, right? Does that kind of make sense? If the specs that we give you do not have return in it, you don't have to return anything. If it says print, print. If it says return, return. And that is a big one. If it says return, you need to return. Not doing that is automatically losing a bunch of points that are like really easy to like not lose. So just look for the word return. If it says return, return. If it doesn't say return, if it says print, print, right? Does that make sense?
yes, it does. Thank you.
Other questions about that?
So if something is just returned, though, that doesn't always print to the screen when you're running it in a shell, correct?
Correct. In fact, just return on its own will not print to the shell.
Okay, so then we do need to do a print, whether you tell us to print or not.
You'll need to do a print if you want to see what's in it.
To test it.
Yeah, to test it. But unless we tell you you need to print it, and in some cases we'll ask you to return and print it, which that's a different thing. But again, like just follow the specs. If it tells you to print, print. If it tells you to return, return. If it tells you to print and return, print and return, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. You can print the function call. So the different ways of doing it, like here I was being kind of lazy. But so one way that I could do this is I could do print. So actually here, if I just run this line, what is the shell going to return? What's it going to not return? What's it going to show me? If I just run this line as is.
Oh, it'll just run IM for dogs, right?
Yeah, and it won't. Oh, that is not what I was expecting. But yeah, so I guess it does. Wait, why? I feel like that shouldn't have happened, but that might just be no. All right, no mind. So it does. It does sometimes, but so I'm not sure why it's doing that though. I feel like I was expecting it not to print anything. Oh, but yeah, okay, I know why. So this is why. So if I do this, what will it show down here?
Nothing.
Nothing, right? Because here it's taking this and then putting it into here, right? And
Right.
so but if I just do this, if I run this line, then it'll show me what's contained inside of that variable, right?
Right.
Right, which is going to be GMI, right? And so in this particular instance, test contains or evaluates to this, right? And this evaluates to the same thing, right? Does that make
Yes.
sense? Right.
Yes.
And so doing just test or just this line are essentially, in this case, equivalent things. They both evaluate to the same thing, and you're basically saying, hey, Python, show me what this evaluates to, which is this. And here you're saying, hey, Python, show me what this evaluates to, which is the same thing, right? Which is why it's showing you there. Here, it's not showing it to you because you're saying something else. You're saying, evaluate this and then store it into here, in which case it doesn't show you what's in it.
Okay.
So should you ever return a print? The answer basically is no, because what does this evaluate to?
Hello.
Nope.
Why?
Right, because the function print, the way the function print is coded, it doesn't actually have a return, which means it returns none by default. And so if I take this, if I do this, it prints hello, which is what it's supposed to do. However, if I do test2 equals print, and so I'm taking what print hello evaluates to, storing it inside of the variable test2. If I look at what's actually inside of test2, it'll show nothing. And then if I look at the type of it, class type none, right? Because print hello evaluates, it returns none, but it prints the word hello.
Oh, okay. Okay. I understand. Yes.
Does that make sense? And so
Yes.
like if I were defining my own, I mean, yeah, actually, let's do, essentially it's sort of this, right? So if I do my print, and then I did, pardon my terrible typing skills. So essentially print, this is what print does, right? So if I do this, and here there's no return, so by default it returns none, which is the same thing as saying return none. And so if I do this, and I do, actually here, let's just to not make things more confusing than they need to be. Just because I can understand my miss doesn't mean that everyone else can, which is always a good thing to remember. So if I do here, my print hello, what does that evaluate to? It evaluates to none, because I literally am saying this evaluates to none, and the default print function, that's what it does also. And I'm storing that none into test3, and then, so if I looked at what's inside of test3, it'll be nothing. Class type none, right? Does that make sense?
Okay. So when you say evaluate to, it's always the return.
When I say evaluates to is I'm asking what value does this chunk of code have? Like if I'm Python and I'm reading this, what is the equivalent value of this chunk of code? Which is
So what
sort of a
value is
complicated
being
way.
held?
What's that?
What value is being held by what is in the code?
Exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, so I mean, so that's why the reason I don't say equals to is because it confuses with like the equal, which is actually like a comparison, right? It's a
Yes.
yeah, which is not what we're doing. What we're just saying, like, what does this chunk of code? I mean, in the same way that like if you test for equals. So if I ask you, what does this evaluate to? Like if you're a human reading a math problem, what does this equate to, right? What does this evaluate to? It evaluates to like the sum of all these things, right? Which would be 28, if I'm
28.
yeah. All right. But then if I ask you, what does this evaluate to? You can do that in your head too, right? You can be like, well, this is 23, right?
Correct.
Code is the exact same way, right? So if I do yeah, I mean, so yeah, let's do how about strings instead? Right. So if I ask you, what does this evaluate to if you're Python?
Just the jellyfish? Jellyfish.
It evaluates to the
Evaluates the
string
string.
jellyfish. Right.
Right.
It'll evaluate to a string containing the characters that spell out the word jellyfish. Is the long way of saying that, right?
Right.
If I ask you what this evaluates to,
The string containing the characters like jellyfish.
right? So it'll be one string
Mhm.
containing the characters like jellyfish altogether, no spaces in between, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, and so in the same way, like, and so then when I'm asking what evaluates to, essentially, it's a way of asking you what different chunks of code, like breaking down long, complicated bits of code, not super complicated here, but longer, more complicated bits of code. If you break it down to smaller bits and pieces, you can make sense of like those small bits and pieces, and you can kind of like build up one bigger, one bigger, one bigger, and then make sense of the whole thing, right? And so always keeping in mind like what each like knowing how Python sees and reads each chunk of code is kind of key to being able to understand like what your code actually means and what it's doing, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, okay. Let's see here. Yeah, okay, so I think those were while loops and returns. Again, I'm not sure what that is asking. We did talk a fair bit about while loops and returns actually, so I think I'm going to call that good, unless anyone has any questions about either of those things. No? All right. And so any other questions, anything else you want to go over? We still have another like 15 minutes or so if you want. And if not, then we can call it there.
What would be your recommendation for studying, just it's kind of hard to, I don't know, practice these loops outside of your assignments? Like, what would you recommend to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think something that is probably not trivial. I mean, so you can come up like with your own problems, right? You can come up with like, oh, I wonder if I could do this. Like if you could like like the pig game was a dice rolling game, right? Where you're basically rolling a dice and doing stuff. And so you could come up with your own version of that, like playing cards or something, or just like simple games like that, and then thinking through like how you would actually code that and writing. I mean, there's almost certainly going to be loops in there. Pretty much. I mean, and really like I think part of it also is just kind of like sort of what I'm doing here is if you just kind of like mess around, take things that already exist and like change them, change the parameters, change the way that we're asking you to do things, just take the existing questions and just mess them up a little bit, do them differently,
Okay, got it. Thank you.
There isn't a practice quiz. Yeah, like I said, for the most part, like basically like all of the quiz questions that you've been doing so far and all the homework and discussion assignments so far, like they're all basically practice for the exam. The exam is not going to be different than all the stuff that you've done already. Like it's going to be like obviously different questions, but like the types of questions and the types of things we're asking, they're going to be very, very similar, right? So if you've done all of those things, then you're probably in pretty good shape. If you want to revise any of those things, you definitely can and should. But yeah, I think that's probably your best preparation, is just going through those things and making sure that like everything is like super solid. Any other questions?
So you would say go over everything, I guess, to not
I mean,
anything specific.
no, I mean the exam definitely goes through like all the content. So there's no, there's no one thing that definitely you should like pay. I mean, yeah, everything is important. I mean, obviously, time is limited. I know you guys don't have like all the time in the world to like go over everything. I mean, hit the things that you feel are the less solid for you, right? Like if you're still struggling with loops, I mean that's actually you can do that too. You can try changing any time they use a while loop, change it into a for loop. If you made a for loop, change it into a while loop. You should always be able to transform a for loop into a while loop. You may not be able to transform a while loop into a for loop, depending, I think. But yeah. So yeah, that's one thing. Like I said, just go through if you're feeling less solid about loops, that's definitely a thing you can do. Just go through the loops and do them differently, right? If you're in pig.py, you had things set up with a while true loop, then change it to a while conditional loop. That kind of thing. You can just kind of take what you already have done and mess with it, and see if you can get it to still work if you did it differently. Right, that's true. There's a review PDF, and actually, Logan, I saw you made a review video. Definitely watch that. That's a good one. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. If there's specific areas that you feel less comfortable with, then yeah, just focus on those, right? Like I said, the exam pretty much covers everything. So if there's any part of your code that you're coding that you're less comfortable with, it'll come out, and so just make sure you get solid with it.
Should we go back and review all of the turtle exercises?
Wait, what do you mean? Do you mean just in general, or?
Yeah, just in general. Should we go back and make sure we understand how to write? Because those were pretty simple compared to what we're doing now.
Yeah, those. I
So should
mean,
we?
I would probably spend like a few minutes, but not a whole lot. I think I'm not even sure. I think there may be some turtle related questions, but they're probably going to be like not super hard. So as long as you remember how turtle worked in general, you should be fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So yeah, I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on turtle. I think definitely like the bigger concepts, like just one thing, make sure that you understand like that's the other thing too. When I ask you like what does this evaluate to, and then I ask you like what type it is, that's sort of on purpose. Knowing what each bit of code evaluates to and what type of object that is, that's important, right? Being able to understand whether Python is reading a string or an int or whatever, that really matters, and that needs to be super solid. Like those kind of like bigger concepts, understanding loops, understanding for loops, while loops, conditionals, all those things, those are all going to be like key concepts that you guys need to be pretty solid on. Other questions? All right, I think we'll call it there then. If there's anything else that comes up, definitely feel free to throw them up on Slack. I'm happy to answer any clarifying questions up there. And otherwise, yeah, good luck. Yeah, and thank you all for coming.